I never thought the worst day of my life would end up being the best thing that ever happened to me. 3 weeks after my heart nearly stopped on a bridge 40 feet above a river, my wife tried to finish what my body couldn't. She had no idea what she was actually walking away from. 3 days after marrying her new husband, my ex-wife called me from a gas station off Division Street, crying so hard she could barely get the words out. I let the phone ring 4 times before I picked up. Not to punish her. I was just finishing my coffee. My name is Damian Cross. I'm 45, born and raised in Spokane, Washington. Until 11 months ago, I was married to Rebecca. 14 years together, a house on South Hill with a porch swing I built with my own hands, and a dog named Bailey who always chose her over me, which, looking back, probably should have told me something. Most people want me to jump straight to the divorce part. I'm not going to do that. If I skip ahead, you'll never understand why it broke me, or why what happened afterward felt so satisfying. So stick with me. It all started on the second Sunday of April, the year I turned 44. That morning, my heart nearly gave out on a bridge 40 feet above the Spokane River. 3 weeks later, my wife tried to finish what my body couldn't. One almost killed me. The other changed everything. I own a structural engineering firm called Cross Structural Engineering. We contract with the Washington State Department of Transportation, several counties, and private developers who need honest answers about whether a bridge, parking garage, or pedestrian walkway is safe, or one heavy truck away from collapsing. It's dirty work. Hard hat, steel-toe boots, freezing mornings crawling under concrete while everyone else drives past without a second thought. The reports I write mostly collect dust until something fails. But that kind of work pays well. Not many engineers are willing to hang off a bridge deck in a Washington winter. My share alone clears over $150,000 a year, some years more. I've got 2 employees, a pickup that's outlived some of my nephews, and a bank account Rebecca never once bothered to ask about. As far as she knew, I was just a guy in muddy boots earning a modest government paycheck. I never corrected her. My father built this company out of nothing but grit and a slide rule. Before he died, he left me one piece of advice. Once money becomes dinner conversation, people start changing on you. He learned that the hard way, watching his own brothers turn on each other. So I kept driving the old truck, wore the same 3 flannel shirts, and let Rebecca believe we were comfortable instead of well off. I met her at a wedding up near Lake Chelan when I was 30 and she was 27. Her laugh carried clean across the room, but what actually caught my attention was how closely she paid attention to people. She noticed I ordered my steak medium instead of medium well. She caught me humming old Fleetwood Mac without realizing I was doing it. We ended up at the same table at the reception, and after her second drink, she leaned over with a grin. "You're the quiet one everyone keeps pointing at." I laughed. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "Depends. What do you do?" "I inspect bridges," I said. "Nothing exciting. Mostly I tell people whether their parking garage is about to eat their car." That might be the least romantic thing a man's ever said to me at a wedding. "Give it time. I know worse." That made her laugh even harder, and before the cake got cut, she asked for my number. No woman had ever done that to me before. Up until then, I was always the one asking, and usually getting turned down. For the first 6 or 7 years, I genuinely believed she saw the parts of me everybody else overlooked. Then somewhere around year 8, that started to change. 2 years into the marriage, she opened a downtown hair salon called Rebecca's. Not the most creative name, but the business held steady. Steady just wasn't enough for her. Most of her new circle were married to orthopedic surgeons, real estate developers, guys wearing watches worth more than my truck. I remember the first time I noticed how she talked about me when she thought it didn't matter. At a party, one of her clients asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Rebecca cut in. "Oh, he does something with bridges." "Structural inspections," I said, smiling politely. "I make sure they don't fall down." "Right, that," she said, already turning back to another conversation. "Anyway, Cynthia, tell me more about the chalet." I stood there holding a warm beer, forgotten mid-sentence. I laughed it off, told myself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. The moment I realized something inside the marriage had actually broken came a few months later. My mother, Sophia, 71 years old, drove over from Spokane Valley with a casserole and offered to help me clean the gutters before Rebecca's book club showed up. Rebecca walked through the front door, saw my mother's car in the driveway, and sighed loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Great. Another guest I didn't invite." My mother froze. She never argued with anyone in her life. "I'm just helping Damien with the gutters," she said softly. "I'll stay out of your way." Rebecca forced a smile that never touched her eyes. "You're never in the way, Sophia. It's just tonight was supposed to be my space." 20 minutes later, my mother carried her untouched casserole back to her car and drove home. I stood in the kitchen with my jaw clenched. "You didn't have to do that." Rebecca didn't blink. "Do what?" "Set boundaries in my own house." "It's my house too. And she's my mother." She shrugged, careless. "Maybe if your mother came around less, we wouldn't keep having this conversation." That was the first real crack. I didn't recognize it at the time, but cracks like that never close. They only spread. After that, we stopped being husband and wife and started acting like roommates splitting a mortgage. We still ate at the same table. Still slept in the same bed, facing opposite directions. The small things disappeared first, the hand on my back, the random text saying she was thinking about me. What replaced them wasn't silence. It was a low, constant irritation dressed up as ordinary conversation. "Did you really wear that shirt to the Whitfield's party?" she asked one evening, yanking my collar harder than she needed to. "It's just a shirt." "It's a shirt that makes you look like you fix vending machines." I let that one slide, same as I let almost everything else slide. A few months after that, I came down with the flu bad enough to soak the sheets in sweat. Rebecca stood in the bedroom doorway in her coat, keys already in hand. "I've got a color appointment in 20 minutes. There's NyQuil under the sink." "Okay," I said. She paused just long enough to add, "Try not to make a mess," then walked out. I stared at the ceiling fan for a long time, wondering when exactly the woman who used to bring me soup and sit with me had quietly vanished without either of us noticing. Not long after, we were back at the Whitfields for another dinner party. Rebecca spent the whole night listening to couples talk about a 10-day anniversary trip to Sun Valley, private chalets, luxury spas, the kind of vacation everyone at that table seemed able to afford without blinking. On the drive home, she went quiet in that specific way that meant something was coming. "Diane's husband is taking her to Sun Valley for 10 days. Good for them." She looked at me. "That's all you've got? What do you want me to say?" "I'd like to hear you say maybe we could do something like that. Just once, Damien. I'd like to stop explaining why we always keep things so simple." My hands tightened on the wheel. For 1 second, I almost told her the truth, that I could have bought one of those chalets outright without losing a night's sleep over it. But my father's voice stopped me. "Never let money become the thing people love about you." So I swallowed it. "We'll figure something out," I said instead, and we both knew I hadn't actually answered her. She turned to the window and didn't say another word the rest of the drive. Somewhere between that silence and the headlights sweeping across the highway, I understood our marriage had become a contest I couldn't win no matter what I did. What I didn't understand yet was how much worse it was about to get. The bridge inspection that changed my life looked routine on paper. A pedestrian overpass across the Spokane River Greenbelt, Sunday morning, light foot traffic. My lead inspector Marcus Steele had worked beside me for 11 years by then, long enough to be family. We were 40 feet above the river checking welds and load points when something inside my chest felt like it tore wide open. Even now, I can replay every second of that morning like it happened yesterday. The river was running hard with spring runoff, brown water churning below while cold mist clung to the steel. Marcus was a few feet to my left, dragging a tape measure across a support beam, complaining about his knees like always. I laughed at something he said. I wish I could remember what the joke actually was. Out of everything from that day, that's the one thing I can never get back, the last ordinary laugh of my old life. Then it hit. Not pressure. Not tightness. It felt like something inside my chest tore straight open. A wave of heat shot through me, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Cliff Marcus's voice sharp. Hey, look at me. You're gray. My knees folded. The safety harness dug into my shoulders as I dropped. I remember him grabbing me. I remember the radio screaming for an ambulance. And for some reason, I remember exactly how blue the sky looked above that bridge. 2 days later, I opened my eyes in the cardiac ICU at Sacred Heart Medical Center. A breathing tube had just come out, and Marcus was asleep in a chair about 2 sizes too small for him. That afternoon, my surgeon, Dr. Nathan Reed, walked in carrying my chart. He didn't waste time softening it. You suffered an aortic dissection, he said. The main artery leaving your heart tore. Most people never make it to the operating room. My throat felt like sandpaper. How bad was it? You were in surgery almost 7 hours. The first 48 afterward, he paused. I wasn't confident you'd make it. He closed the chart and looked at me straight. But you're here. That's what matters. Can I work again? Eventually. Not tomorrow and not the way you used to. You'll need rehab, regular monitoring, and you'll be watched for the rest of your life. But a full recovery is realistic. I let out a slow breath. So I'm not dying. A faint smile crossed his face. Not if I have anything to say about it. Your body just gave you a second chance. Don't waste it. A few days later, once I could hold a conversation without exhausting myself, Marcus filled in the parts I couldn't remember from the ambulance bay. He'd called Rebecca because she was listed as my primary emergency contact. Whatever was said on that call, he's never repeated it word for word. The only thing he ever admitted was that he told her I probably wouldn't survive the night. Rebecca showed up at Sacred Heart a little after 8 that evening, before Dr. Reed could take me into surgery. He needed my wife's consent. Marcus was waiting outside the consultation room and overheard most of it. Dr. Reed told her exactly how serious it was. This is a full aortic repair, he said. Given the extent of the tear, I can't promise he survives the night. I need your signature either way, but I also need you to understand what tomorrow could look like. Rebecca signed the consent form without asking a single question. Never asked about my odds. Never asked to see me before they wheeled me in. Never asked what happened if I didn't make it. She signed her name, handed back the clipboard, and asked the nurse where the restroom was. While I was a few doors away, unconscious, fighting for my life, my wife had already decided I wasn't coming home. Looking back, that hurts worse than the scar running down my chest. During the first 2 weeks after surgery, Rebecca visited exactly twice. The first time, she stood by the door instead of the bed. Didn't ask how I felt. Asked Marcus whether I'd ever be able to work again or if I was looking at permanent disability. The second time, she brought paperwork from her attorney. Just a few account updates while you're recovering, she said. I was still on oxygen, heavily medicated. I signed without reading a word. I trusted my wife. I had no idea one of those pages handed her temporary financial power of attorney. Less than 2 weeks later, she used it to file one of the fastest divorce cases Spokane County had seen that year, while I lay in a hospital bed believing she was staying away because facing me was too hard. The truth was a lot colder. As far as Rebecca understood, I was a sick contractor with a damaged heart, an old pickup, and a modest savings account. A man who might never work again. She wasn't preparing to care for a sick husband. She was preparing to leave one before the medical bills started arriving. What she never once considered was how badly she'd misjudged me. 9 days after surgery, with heart monitors still tracking every beat, a woman I'd never seen walked into my room carrying a large manila envelope. Damien Cross. I stared at her. You've been served. Marcus shot out of his chair so fast he knocked over his coffee. Served with what? Divorce papers. Spokane County District Court. She handed me the envelope and walked out without another word. My hands shook reading through the petition. Irreconcilable differences. Request for the house. Request for the Tahoe. Then the line that dropped my stomach out from under me: Rebecca's attorney had requested an expedited hearing, citing my medical condition as a reason the proceedings could otherwise be delayed. In plain English, she wanted the divorce finalized before I was healthy enough to fight it, and before I was strong enough to start asking real questions about our money. Marcus looked at me, then back at the paperwork. She filed while you were unconscious. I watched the disbelief drain out of his face, replaced by something harder. 14 years of holidays and cookouts and shared memories suddenly looked very different to both of us. Cliff, she filed while you were unconscious. His words just hung there. I didn't answer. The only sound in the room was my heart monitor, beeping away like nothing had happened. That's the thing about real betrayal, it doesn't come with a dramatic speech or a warning sign. It shows up in a legal envelope while you're lying in a hospital bed wondering if you'll walk out of it alive. That afternoon I called my attorney, Grace Morgan. She'd handled my company's contracts for almost 10 years and insisted on coming to the hospital instead of talking it through on the phone. The second she sat down beside my bed, I knew this was worse than I thought. She spread the divorce papers across my blanket and read every page twice before saying a word. Finally, she tapped one document. I need you to tell me exactly what Rebecca had you sign while you were on pain medication. She said it was paperwork for the accounts, so bills would keep getting paid. Grace looked straight at me. Do you remember seeing the words power of attorney anywhere? I searched my memory and came up empty. Those days were a blur of painkillers and machines and fluorescent light. Grace didn't need my answer. She already knew. Damien, this isn't just a divorce. She's trying to finish everything before you're healthy enough to object. That power of attorney has already been used. 2 accounts have been closed, and she started transferring the title on your truck. While I was still on a ventilator. Yes, she didn't soften it. I've handled ugly divorces for years. I've never seen someone move this fast against a man still hooked to a cardiac monitor. So what happens now? Grace closed the folder. She'll keep pushing until it's finalized. But legally, this whole case is built on sand. The dates alone tell the story. You were in a medically induced coma. Documents signed while heavily medicated. She tried to divide assets before you could even appear in court. She leaned in. Right now she's betting you'll stay too sick to fight back, a small smile. She's about to lose that bet. At the time, I still didn't fully grasp what Rebecca actually believed. She'd already decided I was a dying man with nothing left to offer. She wasn't ending a marriage. She was cashing out before the funeral. The divorce moved through the system faster than Grace had ever seen, helped along by the simple fact that I was physically incapable of showing up during those first weeks. By the time I could sit in a chair without getting dizzy, Rebecca Cross had legally become Rebecca Lang again. She walked away believing she'd won the house, the Tahoe, everything 14 years of marriage had built. On paper she had. What she didn't know was that cross-structural engineering was worth far more than any of that. The company held a rolling 5-year state contract worth millions over its lifetime, and because I'd always kept the business finances private, Rebecca had never once seen the real numbers. She thought she'd taken everything. In reality, she'd walked away from the single most valuable thing we owned, without even realizing it. My father's advice had protected exactly what he hoped it would. Rebecca divorced a man she believed was broke, sick, and headed for an early grave. She had no idea she'd just abandoned the most valuable asset either of us had ever owned. 12 days after I was served with divorce papers, I remember the number because grief makes you count everything. Rebecca married a man named Daniel Brooks at the courthouse out in Liberty Lake. I didn't hear it from her. Marcus walked into the outpatient rehab center holding his phone like it was bad news wrapped in glass. "Before you look at this," he said, "remember your blood pressure still matters." "Marcus, what is it?" He turned the screen toward me without answering. There she was. Rebecca, in a champagne-colored dress, standing beside a silver-haired man in an expensive linen suit, both of them laughing under strings of lights. Caption: new chapter, same sparkle. "Who is he?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. "Daniel Brooks. Real estate developer. They got married yesterday." I read the caption again, then once more, like the words might rearrange into something less impossible. 12 days, I finally said. "It's been 12 days. Marcus nodded quietly. I was still learning how to sit upright without wearing myself out, and my ex-wife already had a new husband. For once, he didn't try to cheer me up. He just sat beside me and let the silence do its job. Later, I found out Daniel was 51, a successful developer building luxury townhomes along the Spokane River, exactly the kind of man Rebecca's salon friends admired. Through Marcus's wife, I eventually learned Rebecca had met him at a Chamber of Commerce mixer about 4 months before my surgery. 4 months. You can do that math yourself. I stared at that wedding photo longer than I should have, waiting to feel anger. Instead, I felt relief. For years, I'd wondered if I just wasn't enough. Too ordinary, too quiet, too boring. That photo answered every question I'd been asking myself. It was never about me falling short. I was simply useful until somebody she liked better came along. That night I called my mother. I didn't know who else to tell. Sophia Cross never raised her voice, but when I told her Rebecca had already remarried, something in her tone turned colder than I'd ever heard, even colder than the night we lost my father. "She married someone else." "Already," she repeated. It wasn't disbelief. She was giving herself time to process it. "Mom, she met him 4 months before my surgery." A long silence. "You're telling me she was seeing another man while she was still living in your house?" "Looks that way." Another pause. Then so quiet it hurt, I cleaned her gutters. "Damien. I carried that woman a casserole because I thought she needed support." I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. "She couldn't wait for me to leave." "In all this time, I know," I said. She took a slow breath. "The moment those doctors discharge you, you're coming home with me. Don't waste your energy arguing." I didn't have the strength to argue anyway. And for the first time in weeks, I realized I didn't have to face any of it alone. 3 weeks later, I was finally discharged, titanium wire holding my chest together, a folder full of cardiac rehab appointments under my arm. I moved into my mother's house in Spokane Valley because the South Hill house, the porch swing I'd built with my own hands, the gutters Mom had helped me clean, now belonged, at least on paper, to the woman who'd replaced me before I'd even learned to breathe without a machine. What Rebecca didn't know was that she'd made one mistake big enough to unravel everything she'd planned. Cardiac rehab is painfully slow. You spend hours walking a treadmill at a speed that barely counts as movement, leaving your mind free to replay every bad decision you've ever made. Marcus came with me almost every Saturday, sitting by the window pretending to scroll his phone while keeping one eye on my monitor the whole time. One morning he finally asked, "You've been awfully quiet." "Just thinking about Rebecca. About how I let one person spend 14 years convincing me I wasn't enough. I built a business nobody could push around, and somehow I let it happen in my own house." Marcus looked at me. "You loved her." I shook my head. "I loved the woman I thought I married. I'm not sure she still existed after the first few years." The treadmill crawled forward while I watched the numbers change one painful step at a time. "Feels like I'm recovering from 2 surgeries," I said. "One on my heart, one on my pride." Marcus didn't offer a speech. He just nodded and stayed in the chair beside me. Sometimes that's all a friend needs to do. During those long weeks, Grace Morgan finally walked me through what Rebecca's rushed divorce actually meant. Legally, it wasn't nearly as airtight as she believed. Washington judges don't look kindly on asset transfers signed by someone heavily medicated and recovering from emergency heart surgery under a questionable power of attorney. Grace filed a motion to reopen the settlement using my medical records, the timeline, and the unauthorized account transfers. It wouldn't happen overnight, but she was confident. As she put it, anyone who actually understood the law could see the case was built to collapse. Neither Rebecca nor her new husband realized it yet. They had much bigger problems on the way. About 6 weeks after the courthouse wedding, Marcus called. I could tell from the first word he was trying hard not to laugh. "You sitting down?" "Doctor's orders." "I'm always sitting down." "Riverside Bluffs." "Daniel's luxury development." My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "One of the retaining walls failed last night after the spring runoff. Half the riverbank slid straight into the parking garage. Anyone hurt? No, empty building. But the county shut the whole project down this morning and ordered an independent structural review. I knew exactly where this was going before he said another word. "They hired one firm for the original approvals," Marcus continued, "but now the county engineering board is recommending someone else for the independent review." He paused just long enough to enjoy it. "Guess whose name is at the top of the list?" I never asked for revenge. I never went looking for it. 2 days later, Marcus called again, barely containing himself. "Cliff, you need to hear this. The state's putting together an emergency contractor list." I stayed as far away from the project as I could. There was an obvious conflict of interest, and Grace would have thrown me out of my own office if I'd tried to get involved. I didn't need to be on the inspection team to know how it would end. The independent review was brutal. Investigators found shortcuts in the soil compaction and the drainage system, exactly the kind of mistakes my company would have caught before construction ever started. Daniel had rushed the job to hit his deadlines, and now the bill had come due. Within weeks, 3 lenders pulled their financing. 2 major lawsuits followed. By early fall, Daniel Brooks filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Rebecca had divorced the man she thought was dying and broke, only to marry the man she thought was successful and untouchable. She'd misjudged both of us. Spokane isn't a huge city. News travels fast, especially through a downtown salon where clients spend hours talking. Before long, everyone knew about Daniel's failed development. Nobody blamed Rebecca for the collapse directly, but gossip doesn't need facts to spread. Appointments at her salon started disappearing. Friends who'd celebrated her new marriage quietly stopped returning calls. The same people who'd admired Daniel's success suddenly acted like they'd never known him. While their world came apart, mine quietly rebuilt itself. The state's 5-year contract renewal for cross-structural engineering came up that same fall. Thanks to our clean safety record and thanks to every agency suddenly wanting inspectors who actually refused to cut corners, the contract wasn't just renewed, it was expanded. We picked up 2 additional counties and became one of the largest structural inspection firms in the state. A regional engineering magazine even ran a feature on the company under the headline "Spokane's Quiet Bridge Doctor." The photo showed me standing in front of the Division Street overpass, thinner than before, leaning on a cane but very much alive. 8 months earlier, most people would have bet against that. That article eventually reached exactly the person it was meant to. 3 days after Daniel's bankruptcy went public, my phone rang at 9:40 on a Thursday night. Rebecca's name lit up the screen for the first time since the divorce. I let it ring 4 times before answering, not out of spite, but because I honestly needed those seconds to decide whether she deserved to hear my voice at all. "Damien," she whispered, already crying. "What is it, Rebecca?" "I saw the article. About your company. About the state contract." She caught her breath. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of that. You never told me, you never asked." Silence. Then finally, the words I'd been waiting months to hear. "I thought you were dying. The doctor said you might not make it." She kept going through the tears. "I panicked. I thought I was going to be 42, alone, with a house I couldn't afford and a husband whose business barely made ends meet." Those words told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't left because she'd stopped loving me. She'd left because she thought there was nothing left to gain. "And Daniel looked like the safer bet," I said quietly. Silence. Then I made a mistake. Her voice was barely holding together. "Daniel's filing for bankruptcy. The bank already started foreclosure on our house, the one we bought together. I have nowhere to go, Damien. I have nothing." I sat on my mother's back porch looking out toward the hills, thinking about the porch swing I'd built with my own hands at the house I used to call home. "Damien, please. We were happy once. Remember Lake Chelan. Remember our wedding. Remember us." "I remember all of it," I said. "Every year. And I remember the year you decided I wasn't worth staying for." She tried to cut in. "I didn't let her. You didn't leave because you stopped loving me. You left because you thought Daniel had money and I didn't. You walked out on your husband while he was hooked to a heart monitor because you believed someone else offered a better future. Now he's lost everything and suddenly you remember our past. That's not fair." "No," I said, cutting her off. What wasn't fair was getting served divorce papers in the ICU before I could even stand on my own. What wasn't fair was learning my marriage was over from a legal envelope while I still had tubes coming out of my chest. She cried without saying anything else. This time it sounded real. "I have nowhere else to turn," she whispered. "Please." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I know. And I mean this, I truly hope your life gets better, Rebecca. But it won't be with me." Then I ended the call. I didn't block her that night. I did it the next morning over coffee, as calmly as deleting the number for a business I'd never need again. 2 months later, Grace called with the court's decision. "The judge ruled completely in your favor," she said. "The settlement's been reopened. The court found the original agreement was executed in bad faith while you were medically incapacitated. You're getting a substantially larger share of the marital assets." "It was never about the money," I told her. Grace laughed softly. "I know. It was about making sure what happened to you never becomes acceptable." She paused. "So how do you feel?" I looked out the window before answering. Lighter. I hadn't fought because I wanted revenge. I fought because someone tried to take advantage of me while I was too sick to defend myself, and I wasn't going to let that be the final chapter of my story. Once everything settled, I sold my share of the old South Hill house instead of moving back in. Some homes carry too many hard memories to ever feel like home again. Instead, I bought a modest cabin near Lake Chelan, not far from where Rebecca and I first met. Maybe that sounds ironic. I prefer to think I refused to let one person ruin a place I'd loved long before I ever knew her. Marcus and his family come up almost every weekend. My mother has her own room there now, and nobody will ever make her feel like an unwelcome guest again. Cross-structural engineering has grown to 4 employees, the state contracts keep expanding, and I still spend my days crawling under bridges most people never notice. My cardiologist says my heart is stronger than men 15 years younger. These days, he tells me the biggest reason it keeps getting stronger is simple: I finally have a life peaceful enough to let it rest. The last thing I heard, Rebecca had moved back in with her parents out near Cheney after Daniel's bankruptcy. Her salon closed a few months after that. I don't wish her misery. I honestly don't. But I also don't spend my days wondering what became of her. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. It just means you stop carrying the weight. What I learned sitting on a different porch looking out over a different lake is this: some people only measure your value by what they think they can gain from you. The moment they decide there's nothing left to take, they leave. And if they ever come back, it's usually because they finally realized what they walked away from, not because love returned, but because the math changed. For 14 years, the person who should have known me best underestimated me. In the end, that turned out to be my greatest advantage. Rebecca never cared enough to ask what my company was actually worth. She never looked past the old truck, the worn flannel, the muddy boots. She built her whole future on assumptions. And as someone who's spent a lifetime inspecting structures, I can tell you this much for free: nothing built on a weak foundation stands for very long. Last Saturday, Marcus drove up with his family. We grilled fresh trout by the lake while the sun dropped behind the mountains. My mother sat in her favorite chair telling one of her old stories about my father, and everyone listened like it was the first time they'd heard it. Bailey, who came home with me thanks to the settlement and remains the single best thing I won in court, slept across my boots the whole evening. Marcus watched the sunset a while before saying, "You look good, Cliff. Better than I've seen you in years." Most days I feel that way. You ever think about her? Sometimes, I admitted, scratching behind Bailey's ears. Just not the way I used to. These days I don't think about what I lost. I think about how close I came to spending the rest of my life with someone who only ever saw my worth through a calculator. And I'm strangely grateful my failing heart exposed the truth before the rest of my life slipped away along with it. I never needed Rebecca to recognize what I was worth for it to be real. I only needed enough time to recover, rebuild, and find that out for myself. Sometimes justice isn't decided in a courtroom. It's decided by the choices we make. This was cold verdict. Because every story has a verdict.